The warehouse floor smelled faintly of cardboard and machine oil, a cocktail of dust and effort that clung to the air. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering just enough to make the shadows dance across the concrete. The grinder conveyor belt set a rhythm, constant, unrelenting. While voices echoed between the aisles, workers shouting numbers, calling for help, or just sighing as another heavy box thudded down. And in the middle of it all, unnoticed among the moving bodies, stood a man in a faded navy cap. His polo shirt looked ordinary. His jeans scuffed at the knees, like he had lived a dozen hard shifts before this one. He kept his head low, his eyes observant but quiet. His name, to everyone around him, was simply Dan. But Dan wasn't like the others. He wasn't here to clock in, stack boxes, and clock out. He wasn't here to blend in for survival. He was here for truth. Because Dan was really Daniel Grayson, the CEO of the entire company. And today, he was about to witness something that would change not just the fate of one employee, but the entire workplace. The air was heavy that morning, with workers dragging themselves into position like soldiers at the start of another endless battle. Forklifts beeped in reverse, steel rattled, and a supervisor barked out orders with the sharpness of someone who enjoyed being heard more than being helpful. Daniel kept his posture loose, blending in like a new hire, eager not to cause trouble. He picked up boxes, followed instructions, and made his way around the floor without revealing the authority that rested quietly in his back pocket. What struck him immediately was the mood. Not just exhaustion, defeat, shoulders slumped, eyes darted nervously at clipboards. Conversations were short, clipped, broken off whenever a manager passed by. And then Daniel noticed her. A woman, early 40s, with lines under her eyes that spoke of long nights and harder mornings. Her name tag read MIA. She moved quickly, efficiently, her hands roughened from years of work. She was small, but every ounce of her strength went into the boxes she lifted, the pallets she pushed, the endless cycle of tasks. Every few seconds, she glanced at her phone tucked discreetly into her apron pocket. Not to text. No, Daniel caught the glimpse of a small face on her lock screen. A child. Her daughter, perhaps. It was a fleeting look of both love and worry. Daniel filed that away. It didn't take long for the first crack to show. MIA stumbled with a box, too heavy for her slight frame. It dropped to the ground with a dull thud. The sound seemed to travel across the floor like an alarm. And then came the voice. Loud, mocking, cruel. Well, look who's slowing us all down again. It was a floor manager, Rick, a man with a chest that puffed out like he owned the air everyone breathed. His smirk was sharp, his laugh even sharper. MIA bent to pick up the box, her face flushing red. I'm sorry, Rick cut her off with a laugh that sliced through her apology. Sorry? What's sorry gonna do? You gonna ask the box to jump back on the pallet for you? Maybe next time. Hit the gym before you clock in. The laughter that followed wasn't from MIA. It was from Rick himself, a hollow, echoing sound that made the room feel colder. Daniel watched, every muscle in his jaw tightening. He wanted to step in, to shut Rick down right there. But he held back. Not yet. He needed to see more. Hours passed. Small injustices piled up like bricks in a wall. A younger worker asked Rick for clarification on a task, only to be told, if you need me to explain twice, you don't belong here. Another tried to request a break, but Rick waved him off. You'll survive. You're not made of glass. And MIA? She kept going, even as her hands trembled, even as sweat plastered her hair to her forehead. She never stopped, never complained. She just pushed forward, box after box, as though her daughter's face on that phone screen gave her the fuel she couldn't find anywhere else. But Daniel noticed what Rick did every time MIA faltered. Not just the laughter, the pointed looks at others, the roll of his eyes, the way he made a struggle into a spectacle, a joke, a punchline for his own ego. And the worst part? Nobody defended her. Because in this warehouse, Rick's voice was a law. That night, when the shift finally ended, Daniel followed MIA quietly out to the parking lot. Her car was old, dented, the kind of vehicle held together more by hope than mechanics. She slid into the driver's seat, rested her forehead against the steering wheel, and for a moment, just a moment, let the mask fall. A single sob escaped her lips. Daniel turned away. The truth was clear enough. This wasn't just about a job. This was survival. And the man tasked with leading these workers, the man with power, wasn't leading at all. He was crushing. The next morning, the tension cracked open. MIA was carrying a stack of boxes when her knee buckled. She stumbled forward, the boxes spilling across the floor. A hush fell over the warehouse. Rick's voice boomed like a gunshot. Unbelievable. What is wrong with you? You think this is a daycare? You think we're here to babysit your clumsy? He stopped, because from the crowd, a voice answered back. Calm, controlled, firm, enough. Every head turned. Daniel stood there, kept still, pulled low, but his eyes, steady, unwavering, locked on Rick. You think mocking people makes you a leader. Daniel's voice carried in the silence. You think laughing at someone's pain makes you strong. Rick sneered. Who the hell do you think you are? You're nobody. You're just some temp they threw in to fill gaps. Daniel's hand reached slowly to his pocket. He pulled out his ID badge. Not the temporary one clipped to his shirt. The one that bore his full name. His title. CEO. The warehouse went still. MIA froze, her hand halfway to gathering the boxes. Rick's smirk faltered. Daniel took a step forward, his voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. I am the reason this place exists. I am the reason you have a paycheck. And I've been standing here for 2 days watching you turn this warehouse into a place of fear. Watching you tear down people who are breaking themselves just to make ends meet. Watching you laugh when the only thing they need is a hand. Rick stammered. I didn't know. Daniel's eyes didn't blink. That's a problem. You didn't care. Rick's laughter had been loud, but the silence that followed Daniel's words was deafening. Mia's eyes brimmed with tears. Not from shame this time, but from the shock of being seen. Truly seen. And the other workers? For the first time in months, maybe years, they stood a little taller. Hope flickered in their eyes like the first spark of fire in the dark. But this wasn't over. Daniel knew that firing Rick was only the beginning. Because when you cut out rot, you don't just stop at the surface. You dig deeper. And as Daniel prepared to confront the higher managers who had allowed this culture to grow unchecked, he realized something. The warehouse wasn't broken by accident. It was broken by design. And fixing it would take more than one confrontation. It would take war. In every workplace, there are people like MIA, quiet fighters who bear the weight of their struggles in silence, believing no one notices. And too often, there are people like Rick who mistake cruelty for strength, who laugh at pain instead of lifting burdens. Leadership isn't measured by the titles we hold or the orders we give. True leadership is measured by empathy, the willingness to see people, to hear them, and to fight for their dignity even when it costs us comfort. Because at the end of the day, resilience isn't built by those who laugh at the struggle. It's built by those who reach down, offer a hand, and say, you don't have to carry this alone. But what Daniel would soon discover was that Rick was only the beginning. There were others, bigger, smarter, hidden in plain sight, and their downfall was only just beginning. The warehouse floor was quiet to the morning after Rick's fall. Where his voice had once filled the air with mocking jeers, there was only the sound of machines whirring and forklifts humming. The workers moved differently, too. Their steps weren't lighter exactly. Years of exhaustion don't vanish overnight, but there was something new in their eyes. A spark, a whisper of relief. And MIA? She walked in with her head just a little higher, though the shadows under her eyes remained. She still carried the weight of bills, a sick child at home, and the fear of what tomorrow might bring. But for the first time, she wasn't invisible. Someone had seen her. Someone had stood up for her. That someone, of course, was Daniel. But he wasn't done. Not even close. Because what Rick had revealed wasn't just one man's cruelty. It was a symptom. And Daniel knew symptoms always pointed to a deeper disease. That afternoon, Daniel slipped into the break room. The air smelled of stale coffee and microwaved leftovers. The vending machine buzzed faintly, its glass streaked with fingerprints. Workers sat hunched at tables, some scrolling their phones, others simply staring at their food as if too tired to eat. MIA was there, nursing a cup of instant coffee. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it, not from the weight but from the quiet stress that seemed stitched into her bones. Daniel sat at the table across from her. You work hard. he said softly, his voice still carrying the tone of a fellow worker, not a CEO. MIA looked up, startled. "Oh, I try." "You do more than try," Daniel replied. "I've seen you. You don't stop, no matter how heavy the boxes get." Her lips pressed into a thin smile. "That's life, right? You keep moving, or everything falls apart." There was something in her tone, a heaviness that lingered beneath the words. Daniel leaned in slightly. "Who was the little girl on your phone?" he asked gently. MIA froze for a moment, then her face softened. "That's Lily, my daughter. She's 7. A pause. "She's sick. Asthma. The hospital bills." She broke off, shaking her head. "Never mind. It's not your problem." Daniel's chest tightened. Asthma. Medical bills. Long shifts. No wonder MIA worked herself to exhaustion. No wonder she pushed past pain. She wasn't just lifting boxes. She was lifting her entire world. But Daniel kept his cover. For now. Later that day, Daniel sat quietly near the shipping office, pretending to sort inventory. He could hear voices through the cracked door. 2 supervisors. Talking low. "Can you believe Rick got canned just like that? No warning." "Yeah, but he had it coming. The guy was reckless." "Still, makes me nervous. If corporate's watching, we're all on thin ice." A beat of silence. Then the first voice lowered even further. "You think they'll notice the hours?" Daniel's ears sharpened. "What hours?" You know, the overtime they are cutting from payroll. Adjusting the clock INS. We've been doing it for months. It's the only way the numbers balance. If corporate looks too closely." Daniel felt the weight of those words land like a hammer. Cutting hours. Adjusting payroll. They weren't just overworking employees. They were stealing from them. Suddenly, Rick wasn't the disease. He was just a symptom. The rut went higher. That evening, Daniel slipped out of the warehouse and into his rented sedan. He sat in silence, staring at the steering wheel. Stealing hours. Ducking pay. It was theft, plain and simple. And people like MIA, people already drowning in bills, were the ones paying the price. He pulled out his phone, typing notes quickly. Every detail mattered. Every conversation was a piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just about a cruel manager anymore. This was about corruption at the core of his company. His company. And Daniel wasn't going to stop until he cut it out. The next day, the storm began to build. Daniel noticed it almost immediately. The supervisors, men in crisp shirts who rarely left the office, were suddenly everywhere, watching, whispering. Their eyes flicked toward him often, their expressions tightening when he met their gaze. Word was spreading. Someone was asking too many questions. Someone didn't fit. MIA noticed it too. During lunch, she leaned across the table, her voice barely a whisper. "Careful. They're talking about you." Daniel tilted his head. "Me?" She nodded quickly. "The managers. They think you're different, not like the rest of us." Her eyes searched his face. "You're not, are you?" For the briefest moment, Daniel considered telling her the truth. That he wasn't just some temp worker. That he was a man who owned the building, the machines, the very paycheck she clung to. But he stopped himself. Not yet. Instead, he smiled faintly. Different isn't always bad. MIA studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. But Daniel could see the doubt still flickering behind her eyes. The breaking point came 2 nights later. Daniel was stacking pallets when he heard Ray's voices near the office. He moved closer, careful to stay in the shadows. Inside, he saw one of the supervisors, Alan, arguing with another worker. The worker, a young man barely 20, held a crumpled timesheet in his hand. "This is I work 32 hours. But I clock 40. I need those hours. Man, I can't." Alan's face was stone. "You're lucky you even have a job. You don't like the pay. There's a door." The young man's voice cracked. "But that's my rent. You can't just..." Alan leaned in, his voice low and sharp. "I can do whatever I want. You think corporate cares about you? You're nothing but numbers. And numbers can be erased." The young man's shoulders slumped. He folded the timesheet and walked out, defeated. Daniel's fists clenched. This wasn't just toxic management. This was exploitation. Systematic, deliberate exploitation. And Alan wasn't even trying to hide it. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk in the small apartment he'd rented under a fake name, the room lit only by the glow of his laptop. He pulled up payroll reports, timesheets, overtime logs. With his access as CEO, he could see everything. And what he found made his stomach turn. Dozens of workers, hundreds of hours, cut, adjusted, erased. The theft wasn't small. It was massive, millions over the years. And at the center of it all, Alan, the supervisor, with direct ties to upper management. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding. This wasn't just about saving MIA. This wasn't even just about cleaning one warehouse. This was about corruption that stretched far higher than he had imagined. The next morning, Daniel walked into the warehouse with a new resolve. He looked at MIA, struggling as always to carry more than her body should allow. He looked at the young man who had lost his hours, his eyes hollow with defeat. He looked at the rest of the workers, each one weighed down by the invisible chains of fear and poverty. And then he looked at Alan, standing tall with his clipboard, smug in the belief that no one could touch him. Daniel's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about observing anymore. It was time to act. But just as Daniel was about to make his move, something happened that stopped him cold. MIA collapsed. One moment she was lifting a box. The next, she was on the ground, clutching her chest, gasping for air. Panic rippled across the floor. Workers rushed to her side, shouting for help. Someone dialed 911. Daniel's blood ran cold. Asthma. Lily. He remembered. He pushed through the crowd, dropping to his knees beside her. MIA. Stay with me. Breathe. Slow, deep breaths. Her eyes fluttered, her voice barely a whisper. I can't breathe. Daniel gripped her hand, his own voice breaking for the first time. Hold on. Just hold on. The wail of sirens grew in the distance, and as Daniel looked into Mia's terrified eyes, one truth seared itself into his heart. He had waited too long. Every leader faces a choice: wait for the right moment, or act when people are hurting. Daniel had waited, gathering evidence, playing it safe. And now, one of his strongest workers, one of the people he had sworn to protect, was fighting for her life. It is easy to talk about justice, harder to live it, harder still to act when the cost is high. But if leadership means anything, it means this: people first. Always. And Daniel knew, as the ambulance door slammed shut, that the time for waiting was over. The war against corruption had just become personal. The ambulance's red lights faded into the night, leaving behind a silence that weighed heavier than any box in the warehouse. The workers stood frozen, their hands still stained with grease and cardboard dust. Some whispered prayers. Others just stared at the empty space where MIA had collapsed, their faces pale with fear. And Daniel, still disguised in his polo and cap, stood with his fists clenched at his sides. His chest rose and fell in jagged breaths. He had promised himself to wait, to gather more proof before acting. But Mia's collapse was proof enough. He couldn't wait anymore. The next morning, Daniel walked into the hospital. The air smelled of antiseptic, sharp and sterile. Machines beeped steadily from nearby rooms, each sound a reminder of fragile life. He found MIA in a small room near the end of the hall. She looked smaller than he remembered, dwarfed by the hospital bed. An oxygen mask covered her face, her breath shallow but steady. At her side sat a young girl with big brown eyes, Lily. Daniel paused at the doorway. The girl clutched her mother's hand with both of her own, whispering words Daniel couldn't hear. The sight pierced him. Slowly, he stepped inside. Lily looked up, wary. Who are you? Daniel hesitated. His instinct was to give the safe answer, just a co-worker. But something inside him cracked. I'm someone who cares about your mom, he said softly. She's one of the strongest people I've ever met. Lily studied him for a moment, then nodded. She turned back to MIA, squeezing her hand tighter. Daniel's eyes burned as he looked at MIA, this woman who had carried her world on tired shoulders until those shoulders finally gave out. This wasn't just about hours or money anymore. This was about lives. And Daniel vowed then and there he would not let Mia's struggle be in vain. Back at the warehouse, The atmosphere was tense. Workers whispered in corners, their eyes darting toward the office doors where Alan and the other supervisors huddled. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said MIA wouldn't come back. Others feared they'd be next. And Alan? He strutted through the aisles like a man untouchable, clipboard in hand, barking orders even louder than before. Daniel watched from the shadows, rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. He had enough evidence to bury Alan, but evidence wasn't enough. He needed to show the workers, all of them, that they were worth fighting for, that they weren't powerless. It was time to step out of the shadows. The break came 2 days later. Daniel called an emergency meeting on the warehouse floor. The workers gathered reluctantly, exchanging uneasy glances. Meetings like this were rare, and usually meant bad news. Alan stormed in, his face red. "What's going on here? Who called this meeting?" Daniel stepped forward. His cap was still on, but his voice carried the weight of authority. "I did." The workers fell silent. Alan scoffed. "You? You don't have the authority to." Daniel reached into his pocket. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out his ID badge. Not the temp badge. The real one. The one that bore his name, Daniel Grayson. CEO. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some workers' jaws dropped. Others whispered his name like it was a myth come to life. Alan's smirk collapsed. Daniel's eyes locked on him. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "I've spent weeks undercover in this warehouse. I've seen workers like MIA breaking their bodies to survive, while you and your friends steal their hours and their dignity. I've watched people suffer under your abuse while you laugh." His gaze swept across the workers, steady and fierce. No more. The warehouse erupted. Workers cheered. Some clapped, others shouted, their voices echoing through the cavernous space. For the first time in years, hope surged like a tidal wave. But Alan wasn't finished. His face twisted with fury. "You think you can just walk in here, wave your little badge, and scare me? You don't know how this place works. You're just another rich man playing hero." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low and unshakable. "No, Alan, I'm a leader, and leaders don't steal from their people. They fight for them." Alan's eyes flicked nervously to the office where upper management often hid. He sneered, but there was fear in his voice now. "You think firing me will fix this? You have no idea how deep this goes." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then I'll dig as deep as I have to." The fallout was immediate. Alan was escorted out of the building, his protest drowned by the cheers of the workers. But Daniel knew Alan's words weren't empty. The corruption didn't end with one man. It ran through the veins of the company like poison. And somewhere above Alan, people far more powerful were pulling the strings. That night, Daniel sat in his apartment with files spread across the table. Payroll logs, emails, contracts, each one another thread in a web of deceit. At the center of it all was a name he hadn't wanted to see. Michael Langston, Chief Operating Officer, Daniel's right-hand man. The betrayal hit him like a knife. If Michael was involved, this wasn't just negligence. It was conspiracy. Daniel closed his eyes, the weight of it pressing down. How many more Mias had suffered because of this? How many lives had been stolen? The next morning, Daniel returned to the warehouse. The workers greeted him with cautious smiles, relief etched into their faces. But he noticed the fear still lingering in their eyes. Because deep down, they knew Alan was just a piece of the puzzle. And until the whole truth came out, none of them were truly safe. Daniel gathered the workers once more. His voice was steady, but inside, his heart was heavy. "This isn't over," he said. "We've removed one problem, but the fight has just begun. What's happening here isn't an accident. It's a system. And I promise you, I will tear that system down." The workers erupted again, but Daniel's mind was elsewhere. He thought of MIA, lying in a hospital bed. He thought of Lily, clutching her mother's hand. And he thought of Michael Langston, the man he had trusted, waiting somewhere in an office tower, convinced his secrets were safe. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. They weren't safe anymore. Injustice is rarely the work of a single person. More often, it's a system, built piece by piece, excuse by excuse, until cruelty becomes routine and theft becomes invisible. But change begins when someone is willing to stand. not just against one bully, but against the entire system that allows bullies to thrive. Leadership isn't about comfort. It's about courage. And sometimes, courage means realizing the enemy isn't outside the walls. It's inside them. For Daniel, the fight for MIA and every worker like her was no longer just business. It was war. And the man he would have to face next wasn't a stranger. It was his closest ally. The city skyline shimmered with glass and steel as Daniel's car pulled into the underground garage of corporate headquarters. The hum of the warehouse was gone, replaced by the sterile silence of executive power. It felt worlds apart from the dust and sweat he had lived in just days earlier. But Daniel carried that warehouse with him. He could still smell the cardboard, still hear Mia's gasp for breath, still see Lily's frightened eyes. And he wasn't here as a polished CEO with tailored suits and rehearsed speeches. He was here as a man who had seen the truth from the ground. The fight was about to begin. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor. The air smelled faintly of leather and coffee beans, the kind only executives could afford. The hallway was lined with framed photos, smiling employees, ribbon cuttings, charity galas. A curated lie. At the end of the hall, the glass doors to the boardroom loomed. Inside, Michael Langston waited. Michael had always been the golden boy. Sharp suits, sharp words, and sharper instincts. Daniel had trusted him for years, relying on his efficiency to keep the company running. But now Daniel saw what that efficiency truly meant. Cutting corners, cutting hours, cutting lives. Daniel pushed open the door. Michael looked up from the table, his expression smooth as glass. Daniel, to what do I owe this surprise? Daniel's voice was calm, but his eyes burned. We need to talk. Michael leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. About what? Daniel dropped a thick folder onto the table. Payroll reports, timesheets, testimonies. About this, Daniel said. Michael's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to Daniel. You've been busy. Daniel leaned forward, his tone sharp. Busy watching people suffer. Busy watching workers collapse because they're being squeezed dry while their hours vanish into thin air. Busy discovering that the rut goes all the way up. Michael didn't flinch. He simply smiled, the kind of smile that hid more than it revealed. You don't understand, he said smoothly. This isn't corruption. This is survival. Numbers have to balance. Shareholders demand growth. Cutting a few hours here and there keeps the lights on. Daniel's voice rose. No, cutting hours puts food off the table. It takes medicine out of children's hands. It nearly killed one of our best workers. Michael's smile thinned. MIA, isn't it? Daniel froze. Michael shrugged. Word travels. She was weak, Daniel. Weak workers don't last. That's the reality. We can't save everyone. Something in Daniel snapped. His fist slammed onto the table, the sound echoing through the glass walls. Don't you dare call her weak. She's stronger than you'll ever be. For the first time, Michael's calm faltered. His eyes narrowed. Careful, Daniel. You may own the title, but I run this company. Without me, everything falls apart. Do you really think you can clean this up without burning the whole empire down? Daniel leaned in, his voice low but lethal. Then let it bone. The room went silent. Later that night, Daniel sat alone in his office. The city glowed below him, 1,000 lives moving like ants in the dark. He felt the weight of the decision pressing down. Expose Michael, and the scandal could destroy everything he had built. Investors would flee. Shareholders would revolt. The company might collapse entirely, stay silent, and the workers, people like MIA, would keep paying the price. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You're in over your head. Walk away, or you'll regret it. Daniel stared at the screen. The war had officially begun. The next morning, Daniel returned to the warehouse. The workers greeted him with cautious hope, but he saw the fears still lingering. Rumors had spread. Some said higher-ups were planning to shut the warehouse down. Others whispered about blacklists and retaliation. MIA wasn't there. She was still in the hospital, but her absence was a wound everyone felt. The workers moved slower, their energy dimmed without her quiet strength. Daniel gathered them together. His voice was steady, but his words carried fire. They are trying to scare us. They are trying to silence us. But I promise you this, no matter how high this goes, no matter how powerful the men behind it are, I will not stop until every stolen hour is paid back, until every worker is treated with dignity." The workers erupted into applause. For the first time, they believed they weren't alone. But in the shadows, Daniel could feel the eyes watching. Supervisors, corporate spies. The system wasn't going down without a fight. That night, Daniel received another message. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a threat. A photo of Mia's hospital room. Daniel's blood ran cold. They weren't just coming for him anymore. They were coming for the people he had sworn to protect. When corruption feels untouchable, it fights back with fear. It threatens, intimidates, and punishes those who dare to resist. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing tall even when fear tightens its grip. Daniel's fight was no longer about a company or even about justice. It was about protecting lives. And now, the war wasn't just professional. It was personal. Because when the system threatened MIA, the very symbol of resilience, it crossed a line Daniel would never allow. The question was no longer if he would bring the system down. The question was, what would it cost? The photo glowed on Daniel's phone screen. Mia's hospital room, dimly lit, her fragile body lying still under white sheets. At her side, Lily sat in a chair, her tiny hand wrapped around her mother's fingers. But the photo wasn't a snapshot of comfort. It was surveillance. The message beneath it chilled Daniel's blood. Back off, or she won't wake up. Daniel's hands trembled. He wasn't a man who frightened easily. But this was no longer about company policy, profits, or corrupt managers. This was a threat against a family, a child. He paced his office, heart pounding, rage clawing at his chest. For years he had built this company with trust, with loyalty, with people he thought shared his vision. And now, those very people were willing to break lives to protect their secrets. He looked out at the city. Millions of windows lit the night like stars. Each one a life, each one a story. And if he surrendered now, if he let fear silence him, how many more would suffer? Daniel clenched his fists. He couldn't protect everyone, but he could protect MIA. He could protect Lily, and he could bring the truth to light. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the hospital. Security had been tightened overnight, but he wasn't sure by whom. A guard nodded him through, recognizing his face. Inside Mia's room, Lily stirred awake in the chair, rubbing her eyes. When she saw Daniel, she sat up quickly. Did you do this?" she asked softly, holding up the folded note she found slipped under the door. Daniel took it, unfolding it slowly. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. "Your mother is paying for your boss's mistakes. Tell him to stop, or she'll never leave this hospital." Daniel's jaw tightened. He crouched down to Lily's level, his voice gentle but steady. "Listen to me, Lily. None of this is your fault. Your mom is strong. She's stronger than anyone I know. And I promise you, I will not let anything happen to her." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "But they are scary." Daniel nodded. "They are. But scary people only win if we let them. And we're not going to let them." He tucked the note into his jacket pocket, his resolve like steel. Back at headquarters, Daniel convened a meeting with his most trusted allies, those he still believed hadn't been corrupted. He laid the folder of evidence on the table, his voice low but fierce. "This isn't just theft anymore. This is criminal. They are threatening lives to keep this buried." One executive, an older woman named Karen, leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "If you take this public, Daniel, it could destroy everything. The board, the investors, they'll turn on you." Daniel met her gaze. "Then let them. I'd rather lose a company than lose my soul." That night, Daniel made his move. In a quiet studio lit only by a single lamp, he sat before a camera. No suit, no polish, just a man with truth in his hands and fire in his eyes. He spoke of the workers, of stolen hours, of broken lives. He told Mia's story, without naming her, but with enough detail to make the world see the injustice clearly. Then he dropped the evidence, emails, payroll reports, signed documents that trace the corruption all the way up to Michael Langston. "I built this company on trust," Daniel said, his voice steady. "But trust has been betrayed. and I will not stand by while people suffer. This ends now." He ended the recording, sent it to 3 trusted journalists, and leaned back in his chair. His heart pounded. There was no going back. The video went live the next morning. Within hours, it exploded across social media. Millions of views. Workers from across the country shared their own stories, echoing Mia's struggle. Outrage boiled. News anchors debated the scandal. Protesters gathered outside corporate offices, their chants echoing into the night. But with the roar of support came the backlash. Anonymous calls flooded Daniel's phone. Threats disguised as warnings. Stock prices plummeted. Board members demanded explanations. And Michael Langston, he vanished. His office was cleared out, his phone disconnected. The man Daniel once trusted was now a ghost. At the hospital, Daniel visited MIA again. She stirred faintly, her eyes opening for the first time in days. Lily gasped, holding her mother's hand tighter. "Mama." Mia's lips parted, her voice hoarse but alive. "Lily." Daniel felt relief flood his chest. She was awake. She had survived. But in that fragile moment, as joy filled the room, Daniel's phone buzzed. Another message. A photo. This time, not of MIA. Of Lily, walking down the hospital hallway, taken from behind. The caption read, "You went public. Now she pays." Courage always comes with a cost. To stand against corruption is to invite the wrath of those who profit from it. But true leadership means protecting the vulnerable, even when it puts everything on the line. Daniel had exposed the truth. The world now knew. The system was shaking. But those in power had no intention of surrendering quietly. And now, the fight wasn't just about workers, or shareholders, or justice. It was about protecting a child. Because when the innocent are threatened, silence is no longer an option. The question was no longer how far Daniel was willing to go. It was, how far would his enemies go to stop him? The message burned in Daniel's mind like fire. You went public. Now she pays. A photo of Lily walking down the hospital hallway, unaware, innocent, followed by unseen eyes. Daniel's grip tightened on his phone until his knuckles went white. He scanned the room, MIA lying weakly in bed, Lily clutching her hand with childlike trust. They had no idea of the storm gathering outside their walls. Daniel swallowed the fear rising in his throat. For the first time, he wished he wasn't CEO, wasn't bound by cameras, press, or politics. For the first time, he wished he could simply be invisible again, like he had been undercover, because invisibility had one power, protection. But invisibility was gone. The world was watching now, and so were his enemies. That evening, Daniel pulled strings no one knew he still had. A private security team, men and women he had trusted years ago, back when he first built a company, was stationed outside Mia's hospital room, discreet but armed with vigilance. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Carter, spoke with Daniel in the hallway. His voice was low, steady. "You've kicked a hornet's nest, sir. Whoever's behind this, Langston, maybe others, they are desperate. Desperate men make mistakes, but they also get dangerous." Daniel nodded grimly. "Then let's make sure their mistakes don't touch MIA or Lily." But danger was already circling. The next morning, the news cycle was chaos. Daniel's video had ignited a firestorm. Protesters flooded the streets, chanting for justice. Lawmakers called for investigations. Workers from across the nation walked out in solidarity. And in the shadows, Daniel's enemies whispered. Michael Langston had resurfaced, but not in an office. On an anonymous live stream, his voice, distorted and cold, spread like poison. Daniel Grayson has betrayed this company. He's no hero. He's a fraud. He's endangering lives for his ego. And if he doesn't step down, innocent people will pay. The threat was clear, and it wasn't empty. Back at the hospital, MIA stirred awake again, her eyes hazy with exhaustion but sharper than before. She looked at Daniel, her voice hoarse. "What's happening?" Daniel hesitated. How could he tell her the truth without crushing her already fragile spirit? Mia's gaze hardened. "Don't lie to me. I've lived my whole life with people lying to keep me calm. Tell me." Daniel exhaled. Then, slowly, he told her everything. About Alan, About Michael, about the threats, about Lily being watched. Mia's lips trembled. She pulled Lily closer, as if shielding her with frail arms could hold back the storm. "They're just kids. Daniel," she whispered. "The workers, my daughter, they didn't choose this fight." Daniel's voice cracked, his own mask falling. "But I did, and I won't let them pay the price for it." The pressure mounted. Corporate board members demanded Daniel's resignation. Investors threatened lawsuits. News outlets questioned his leadership. But Daniel refused to back down. Instead, he doubled down, organizing a press conference where workers, including those from Mia's warehouse, would speak publicly about their struggles. Their voices, unfiltered and raw, would pierce through every polished lie. Yet the night before the conference, Daniel received another message. This time, a video, grainy footage of Lily in the hospital cafeteria, laughing as she drank from a juice box. A man's voice whispered off camera. "Such a sweet child. Shame if she went missing." Daniel's heart stopped. That night, Daniel barely slept. He sat in a chair outside Mia's hospital room, Carter and the security team stationed nearby. He stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. Michael had made his move. This wasn't just corporate sabotage anymore. This was personal war. And Daniel knew, if he didn't end it soon, someone innocent would pay the ultimate price. The next day, the press conference began. Cameras flashed. Workers stood beside Daniel, their voices trembling but strong as they shared their stories. The nation watched. Anger swelled. But halfway through the event, Daniel's phone buzzed. A single text. "Walk outside. Alone." Attached was a live photo. Lily, standing just outside the hospital doors, holding a stuffed bear. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He handed the MIC to one of the workers, whispering, "Keep going." Then he slipped out, heart pounding, every step heavy with dread. As he pushed open the side door, the sunlight hit his face. And there, across the street, a black car idled. The back door cracked open. A voice called out. Cold. Familiar. "Hello, Daniel." Michael Langston. Evil thrives in silence, but when truth is spoken, it lashes out with fury. Courage demands sacrifice, and sometimes that sacrifice is stepping into danger you never imagined facing. Daniel's fight had begun in secret, in the shadows of a warehouse. But now it was blazing under the eyes of the world. And in that light, enemies revealed their true faces. The cost of justice had never been higher. Because now, it wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about saving a child. And Michael Langston wasn't going to let her go without a fight. The black car idled at the curb, its tinted windows hiding shadows that felt heavier than the night itself. Daniel's chest tightened as he saw the door crack open. And then he heard it. Michael Langston's voice, smooth, venomous, and familiar. "Hello, Daniel." Daniel's fists curled at his sides. "Where is she?" Michael smirked from the back seat. His face was calm, but his eyes glittered with malice. "Safe, for now, but that depends on you." Daniel stepped closer, every muscle in his body screaming to rip the door open. "If you've touched her." Michael raised a hand, feigning innocence. "Relax. The little girl is fine. She doesn't even know what's happening. But let's not pretend. Daniel, this was always about leverage. And right now, I hold it." Daniel's voice hardened. "You're finished, Michael. The whole world has seen the truth. Workers are speaking out. Lawmakers are investigating. You can't bury this in a mole." Michael chuckled. "Oh, Daniel, you think outrage lasts? Today's scandal is tomorrow's distraction. Headlines fade. Stock rebounds. But power? Power remains. Unless—" He leaned forward, his smile razor-sharp. "Unless you resign. Publicly. Take the fall. Say you exaggerated. Say you lied. Do that, and the girl walks away unharmed. Everyone forgets. The machine keeps running." Daniel's heart pounded. He saw Lily's face in his mind. Her innocent laugh, her small hand gripping her mother's. He saw MIA, fragile in her hospital bed, fighting for her daughter's future. And he saw the workers, the countless men and women who had carried this company on their backs, only to be broken by it. If he surrendered, Lily would be safe. But the system would go on. Thousands of families would keep suffering. If he stood firm, the truth would prevail. But at what cost? Daniel took a slow breath. His voice came steady, quiet, but with a weight of steel. "You're wrong, Michael." Michael raised an eyebrow. Daniel stepped closer to the car, his eyes locked on his former ally. "Power doesn't last when it's built on fear. It doesn't last when it steals from the weak. You think you hold the strings, but you've already lost, because you forgot one thing." Michael sneered. "And what's that?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "People, they are stronger than you think. Stronger than you. Stronger than me. And they had enough." At that moment, movement flickered in the distance. Police cruisers turned the corner, sirens wailing. Daniel's security team, led by Carter, closed in from behind. Michael's smirk vanished. "What did you do?" Daniel's voice was calm, almost cold. "I didn't do anything. The workers did. They spoke. They fought. And now the law is listening." Michael cursed, slamming the car door shut. Tires screeched as the vehicle tried to bolt, but the cruisers boxed it in, forcing it to a stop. Officers swarmed. Within minutes, Michael Langston, the man who had believed himself untouchable, was dragged out in handcuffs. His protests echoed uselessly into the night. Inside the hospital, Daniel found Lily safe, guarded by Carter's team. She ran to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Is it over?" she whispered. Daniel knelt, pulling her into his arms. His voice broke as he answered. "Yes, Lily, you're safe now. And your mom's going to be okay." Later, when MIA was strong enough to sit upright, Daniel visited her room. She listened quietly as he told her what happened. Michael's arrest, the company's restructuring, the promises of justice that were now finally, truly in motion. Mia's eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of relief. She reached for Daniel's hand. "You didn't give up on us," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "No, because you never gave up, even when you had nothing left to give. You reminded me what leadership really means." Weeks passed. The warehouses changed. Overtime theft ended. Pay was corrected. Supervisors who abused their power were replaced with leaders who had once been overlooked workers. MIA recovered. Slowly, but with strength. Lily laughed again, no longer shadowed by fear. And Daniel, he didn't see himself as a savior. He was just a man who had finally chosen to listen. Injustice often hides in plain sight, disguised as business as usual, disguised as survival, disguised as rules that no one dares question. But behind every statistic is a life. Behind every cut is a family. And behind every injustice, there are voices waiting to be heard, if only someone has the courage to listen. Daniel's story reminds us that leadership is not about titles, profits, or power. It is about responsibility. The responsibility to protect, to stand up, and to sacrifice when silence would be easier. And now, I leave you with a question, one only you can answer inside your own heart. When you see someone struggling, when you witness injustice in front of you, will you stay silent, or will you be the one who stands?